Okay, so last week we started with we read uh chapter 7 verses 6 through 11. Okay, so let's just read that again and then because it's springboards for what we're talking. For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. The Lord your God has chosen you to be a people for his treasured possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. It was not because you were more in number than any other people that the Lord set his love on you and chose you. For you were the fewest of all peoples, but it is because the Lord loves you and is keeping the oath that he swore to your fathers, that the Lord has brought you out with a mighty hand and redeemed you from the house of slavery, from the hand of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Know therefore that the Lord your God is God, the faithful God who keeps covenant and steadfast love with those who love him and keep his commandments to 1,000 generations, and repays to their face those who hate him by destroying them. He will not be slack with one who hates him. He will repay him to his face. You shall therefore be careful to do the commandment and the statutes and the rules that I command of you today. And then we kind of got into a discussion about this idea of what does it mean to be set apart for God? And kind of as we think about that, kind of tied to it, how can we live as his holy people today? And so when we see that word set apart really mean is what does it mean to be holy for God today? And how can we live as that? And then the second question that we were wrestling with is how does knowing that we're chosen by God change the way we view ourselves and our purpose? And so, any other thoughts? And we had a long discussion last time, but we kind of ended. Anything anybody else wanted to unpack or say about this before we move on?
I mean, the only thing I would add to this is just Mark and I were having a conversation the other day about saints. Um,
Uh-huh.
I don't know, just like, and I said, just my definition of what that is just a, person who believes, but that, I wonder, there are other definitions where there are people who are like more than others. And like, I don't know, it makes me wonder if people who have that I heard recently a very modern, like a guy who died within the past couple of years has been canonized or something. And just like if how they view their purpose, is that different than how just the rest of us do? I don't know.
So as we think about the word saint, you probably have to define the word first of all, because um, are you talking about a saint in the context of the Roman Catholic Church, and not just the Roman Catholic Church, but um, the Catholic Church in general? That includes the reason I'm him and on because it's not just the Roman Catholic Church; it's the
Hmm.
the Orthodox Church as well. You know, all of those veins of Catholicism. So if you look at the definition of what a saint would be there, it's been a person who has lived a exemplary life, and that has impacted people. And typically, they have some miracles that have been attributed to them. And then there's this formal process by which there's application and verification and then affirmation that this person is indeed recognized as a saint. But so that's in that Catholic vein. If you look in the Protestant vein, um, saint is really referred to as the believers in God. And so For Paul, when he writes his letters, he says to the saints in Corinth, and so that's all the believers in Corinth. Um, and so you have to kind of think about, okay, what is, as you're talking about saints, what what definition are you using? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, but I was just wondering if the people that are, saints, by the first definition that you referred to, the ones that are have miracles attributed to them or whatever, in 2024, um, are they like this second question that you have there in green? Like, do they view themselves that way in a different way than we do?
Probably not, because you were sainted after death. So it in some ways they're I would say that probably if you're looking at that kind of thing, it's probably like a Mother Teresa. Okay. Now, if you look at Mother Teresa, did she ever think that she was somebody special?
No.
No, no. In fact, if you think about how she talked, how she viewed herself, those kinds of things, she was on the struggle bus just like everybody else,
Oh my gosh.
and so really didn't look at herself as anything exemplary. And so as we think about that, then we think about this idea kind of raising the specter of saint. Um, how does that maybe impact what we mean when we say set apart for God? Because sometimes if we think about it as, okay, it's being set apart for God as like for sainthood, um, in some ways, does that limit us? Because it typically, if we're looking and what does it mean to be set apart, who's supposed to be set apart for God?
We are.
Yeah, we
Mhm.
are, we, all of us.
Mm.
And so sometimes, we'll kind of say, well, it's maybe not so much me, that's for them better people over there, the ones that are doing a better job of it. And it's no, we're all meant to be set apart for God. And if we think about that, we're all supposed to be set apart for what goal? What's the aim of being set apart for God for?
Make God known.
Right. It's to make God known. So it's not being set apart so that you can, be a special people, that you can be someone who's, blessed by God just to get yourself you know, um, in good stead. It's okay, you're being set apart, okay? You're being blessed by God in order that you can impart that blessing, um, and lead and guide people to God. Any other thoughts about any other comments? All right, here are none. So, so as we think about that idea of chosenness, um, how does it become a privilege and a responsibility? How is it a privilege and a responsibility? So think a minute. Let's go back to the piece of scripture here that we're looking at. Um, so what does it say about Israel?
God picked them.
Okay, so it says that God picked them. Why did God pick them?
It doesn't really, no special reason.
Okay, no special reason. What
They're
else?
few, they're insignificant.
Yeah. So yeah, that's good. That's why we're back here. So what does it really say about them that out of all the other people who are on the face of the earth, you're insignificant. Okay? You're there's nothing there that makes you special. Okay? But what was it? It was God just chose you, okay? Because he loves you. Okay. What do we call that? Lord, lo-
Grace.
yeah, grace, grace. So it's all about grace. And so if we think about, what's the definition of grace? God's unmerited love that's being poured out upon us. Okay. And so if we think about that, um, how is that a privilege?
Because we did nothing to deserve that.
Exactly, exactly. So, the challenge with chosenness, we need to think about it as a privilege. But sometimes we think about it more along the line. Remember when you were a kid and you were picking teams for maybe basketball, softball, or tag or whatever? What would you do? You'd
Pick the
have two,
best ones.
huh?
You pick the best ones.
Right.
If you're,
You stand in line and there's two captains and the captains go back and forth and what do?
you pick the best
They pick
players.
they pick the best ones. But but if we think about that kind of metaphor here, who's being picked?
The least.
The
The
least.
least. The least, the ones that are scrawny that can't really participate. And so if you were the one and you're kind of, very talented and getting picked, how does that typically make you feel? Sort of puffed up,
Yeah.
kind of full of yourself.
Yeah.
How does it
Well,
make?
it's also like I was just thinking about this like undeserved love versus the approach that I'm bitter because I work with teenagers, but the entitlement, you know, how entitled. And so people, and it reminds me of like, I don't know, Jesse, if it was like a year ago, something, we had that glue guy that was going back and forth at us about
Hmm.
the prayer thing, like that, and he was really snippy about there it is, ask and you shall receive, like he was thinking I can't remember his original question, but he was just like, God should give me everything I ask for
Hmm. Well,
because,
I think his premise of that was, he proof texts. Okay, he used ask and you shall receive.
hmm
Okay, well, I asked for it, so I should get it, but God's not giving it to me. Therefore, God is a
yeah,
liar.
yeah,
Mm,
because he thought he was entitled,
Right.
to
Yeah.
it.
mhm.
Yeah. So this idea of chosenness um, is, one that, it needs to come from the idea of, you're not entitled.
Mm-mm.
That, you've done nothing to deserve this, and it's only by God's grace and mercy that He chose to love you. Um, now, so in some ways we talk about a privilege. Now, what way is that also a responsibility?
Well, we received unconditional love from God, so it's kind of our responsibility to do the best we can with that love.
Okay, why?
Then because it may be taken away from you, I guess. I don't
Okay,
know.
so I'm just spitballing here. I'm just
And it's
spitballing.
responsibility to make God known through that's part of the responsibility is to
Okay.
live and be a reflection of God's love.
Okay, well, that's a little different because what I thought I was hearing is that, if we don't act, that God's love is conditional, that he'll take it back. Okay,
No,
good, because that's
not
kind of
really that, but it's just, I
okay.
don't know. Yeah, it's just like taking it for granted or something.
Okay, so in some ways, could we then say that in some ways, when we have that attitude, that it becomes cheapened?
Hmm.
Yeah, it becomes cheapened. And so, if it's there and it's counted on, and it becomes sort of expected without any, you know, uh, weightiness to it, it's in some ways cheapened. Um, have we ever heard that before? Cheap grace?
Yes,
Yeah, where does that come from?
Bonhoeffer.
Yeah, it's Dietrich Bonhoeffer. So, as he was, growing up, as he was a young academic in the 1930s in what was becoming Nazi Germany, um, he was trying to, learn how to live in community, um, and how you're supposed to live together. Um, and, in order to live together as a Christian community, it takes lots of grace. And sometimes that grace we can, you know, get puffed up feeling that we're chosen and say, yeah, we really deserve that, which in reality, we don't deserve anything we get. All right. So as we move on, this is the second part of chapter 7 that we're going to look at, verses 12 through 16. And because you listen to these rules and keep and do them, the Lord your God will keep with you the covenant and the steadfast love that he swore to your fathers. He will love you, bless you, and multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your ground, your grain and your wine and your oil, the increase of your herds and the young of your flock, in the land that he swore to your fathers to give to you. You shall be blessed above all peoples. There shall not be a male or female barren among you or among your livestock. And the Lord will take away from you all sickness and none of the evil diseases of Egypt, which you knew, will he inflict on you, but he will lay them on all who hate you. And you shall consume all the peoples that the Lord your God will give over to you. Your eye shall not pity them, neither shall you serve their gods, for that would be a snare to you. So, as you listen to this piece of scripture, anything kind of resonate with you, pop off the page at you, or
Yeah,
questions that
the fact that there will be no sickness, that's something.
okay?
Disease, Hmm.
I think he made it conditional. I will give you all this if you keep covenants.
Okay. So I'll give it to you if you do what?
If you keep the covenant
If you keep the covenant.
and the
Okay.
commandments.
Okay.
So it's conditional.
So so as we think about that, what part's the conditional part?
Let's go back here. Because you listen to these rules and keep and do them, the Lord God will keep with you the covenant and steadfast love. But because you listen to these rules and keep and do them,
Bless you.
so
Thank you.
so so the Lord your God will keep with you. So if they don't hold up their end of the bargain, he doesn't seem to feel that he's obligated to give them all this stuff.
Okay. So let's explore that just for a little bit. So we got this idea of blessing versus curse, right?
Mm.
So we got blessing and curse. And so if what would your definition of curse be? So as we think about this, what would curse be? How would I just walked into your Bible study and I'm reading this and I say, hey, I'm really not understanding this concept of curse. Can you explain it to me?
A curse is not a good thing.
Okay, so curse
It's
is not a
evil.
good thing.
It's something harmful or evil that will come your way.
Okay, so it's something harmful
Not good.
and not good that'll come your way.
It looks like verse 15, the evil diseases, which, they are already familiar with from Egypt, but instead of being inflicted on you, inflict to me seems like the word curse, like you won't be
Mhm.
cursed with this, but it will be on all who hate you.
I am equating curse with punishment.
Okay, so punishment. Okay.
I think God's going to separate from them. Does it go back to the garden
Oh, I
where,
love you, Jeanette. I love you. I love you. I love you. It does
oh,
everything go back to the garden?
oh yeah, that's why I think it does, because everything does go back.
Well, yeah, because, so if we think about the Garden of Eden, foundationally, if what is that story about? It's about relationships, right? It's about
Yeah,
relationships. And so, if we go back to the garden and we use that sort of as, the case study there, what is the blessing and what is the curse?
The blessing is living with God in relationship with God, and the curse is being banished from God.
yeah.
Okay, so I like that concept there, um, but I guess the thing that I don't like is in some ways the way that we would kind of use the word banished. Because banished means, it's in some ways it's got some baggage associated with it. Um,
Well, then just separation from God
yeah, yeah,
is better.
I kind of like that a little bit
How,
better
how about how
because
about time how about time out? Time out. Because like when you think about it, like for a kid, you put them in the corner facing away in a timeout, and they're separated from you and from whatever good. And it is punishment, but the punishment is not, I don't know, it's not like they're being beaten or something. It's
yeah.
just like the
So
just being away from you is hard enough.
where does the okay, if we use the word punishment, where does the punishment come from?
Disobedience.
The
Okay.
breakdown in trust too.
Okay, breakdown in trust, it comes from that. So in some ways, if we think about this idea
Come
of
here.
disobedience, we think about this idea of curse. In some ways, and we think about it in relationship to God, God is allowing human beings to do what human beings want to do and allowing them the consequences of that. So if we go back to the garden, this idea of blessing and curse, okay, the blessing is okay, you live in the garden, you stay away from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you live in harmony with creation, with each other, and with God, right? That's the
Mhm.
blessing.
Mhm.
Now, what's the curse? The curse is okay, you choose not to do that. You suddenly eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Okay. And what happens? There's a breakdown in that kind of relationship. Okay. There's, suddenly your eyes are open. Death and chaos has been allowed into the world. Okay. And so what is God doing? Is God actually, in that situation, is God causing that to happen, saying, oh, you were bad, so therefore this is going to happen to you?
Yeah.
No, it's okay. This, these are the consequences of the choice that you made, and unfortunately, that's going to happen. Now, if we think about that idea in the garden, did God totally abandon them?
No,
No. What did he do?
he clothed them and
Okay, yeah,
sent them out.
he attended to their needs, so he clothed them, and then he sent them out. Why did he send them out? Why could they not be there?
Because God was holy and
And they
they're
were
not.
Exactly.
faithful.
Exactly. So this idea, these principles that we talked about, Leviticus and stuff, this holy God and being in the presence of God is dangerous. Okay. And if you're unclean, you can't be in the presence of God. So, as we think about this idea of the garden, then as kind of the case study, okay, we have blessing. The curse is, God allowing, you know, those consequences to happen. But even in the midst of those consequences, God extends grace and mercy. Okay. If we think about, fast forward and we think about, okay, these people that are here and preparing to go into the promised land, because remember, we're in Deuteronomy, which is just a long, extended, 1 hour, 2 hour sermon to the people by Moses before they go into the land. We got, okay, what the curse that just happened was to their parents. Okay. God brought them to the brink of the promised land, said, here it is, go have at it. And they said, what? No, we don't want it. We would rather, go back and wander and go to Egypt. And so what did God do? Allowed them to wander until they were gone. And then he extends the invitation now to these people. And so if we think about it, here are, the children of that group, and Moses is trying to remind them, okay, of this idea of blessing versus curse.
Is it? It may be coming. I don't remember him saying in and around this, like, hey, yo, your parents like didn't listen to this. Um, uh, why don't you listen to it? Like, is that ever said in here?
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, if you look at the whole thing, you know, he talks all about the beginning, the history. Okay, this is what happens to your parents. This is what God's calling, and this is what you should do, but we know that this is what you're going to do. Because we already know what's going to happen. They ain't going to listen.
Hmm.
And how do we know they're not going to listen? Because
Yes,
their parents didn't listen. Their parents before them didn't listen. Parents before them didn't listen. It's kind of a human struggle, if you will, to listen and obey God. Any other thoughts as we just kind of look at the scripture here for a second? Okay, let's move on. So in verses 12 through 13, God promises to bless Israel abundantly, multiplying their crops, livestock, if they remain faithful to his covenant. So we got this idea that obedience is tied to blessings. Okay. Now, remember when we talk about obedience is tied to God's blessings, It's not tied to his love. Okay. The blessing. So if we think about God, what does God want for us? That's not a trick question.
A relationship with him.
Relationship.
Okay, a relationship. He wants us to flourish. He wants us to, what did Jesus say? John 10:10.
Come that
I-
you might have abundant life.
Right. I've come that you might have life and have it to its full, or I've come that you can have abundant life. And so, when we think about God's blessings is, about that idea of abundant life. And so what does abundant life look like? Because, I think we can also, what when we say abundant life, we can also get blessings here. So what does that look like?
Well, it tells you there. You multiply your family, your crops, and your livestock.
Okay, so if it's not being multiplied, I'm not being blessed.
You're
If
you're
you're blessed, you have what you need. Your needs are met.
Okay.
You may not have it. You may not have everything you want, but your needs are met.
Okay.
you're in relationship with God, and in that you find your identity as a child of God.
Okay. All right. So
So,
huh?
so then what's abundant life?
Okay.
Having purpose, because you're knowing whose you are as a child of God is abundant life.
But then people might say about multiplying their families and crops, and if they remain faithful to his covenant, bless Israel abundantly. But then there's some people who say today, even in today's world, can look at Israel and say, they're not exactly living an abundant life right now. They're under attack all the time. How is God being with them now? Or is it because they're not remaining faithful to his covenant?
So again, are you tied? So think about our conversations. So are you gauging blessing upon how much hardship you have in your life?
No, we talked about that last week
Yeah,
too.
right. Well, I think that's part of the challenge here is that, our definition of blessing is probably different. It's very much tied to um, stuff. It's and resources that we've been given. And if we have that, if that's the um, marker of blessing, then we probably fall short. I mean, some of the most blessed people that I've ever had the privilege of seeing have been some of the poorest people in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so their idea of blessing certainly can't come from resources then. It needs to come from another source. And I think, you know, in some ways, Deb has kind of really hit it on the head in the sense that, it's really tied to this idea of identity, and even vocation, knowing whose we are. Um,
For
and not,
for as I think about it, it's sort of like a matter of belonging. And if
Sure.
you don't belong and you don't have an identity, you feel like hopeless and alone and all of that stuff.
Exactly. And remember, when we think about this scripture here, we're reading it with a 21st century lens, which means that, pretty much when we distill this stuff, we distill it into individualistic terms. Okay. This is not, an ancient context being read and understood within an individualistic terms. This is community. Okay. It's all of them. Okay. So them as a community are going to be blessed. All of them are, connected to one another and connected to God. And so, this obedience that they have, that they're going to be called for, um, is really going to be tied to, how the community thrives, but thrives mostly around how they see themselves and how they see themselves connected to God. Any other thoughts? Okay, then I got some questions for you. Why is this typo here? Why do you think God ties blessings to obedience?
Because you can't get something for nothing.
So you're calling it a quid pro quo?
You know, the last slide that we were looking at, how, if you'll get this, this, and this, and this if you obey. That's what the hardcore Calvinists and the hardcore Presbyterians use. It's like, if you're not prospering, it's because you're not a good Christian.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, there are some sects of Christianity that use that kind of measure um, about how well you're doing.
Wasn't that true in the New Testament also with people who were afflicted, like the blind man that was sitting outside the gate at one point, like, oh, well, what did he do? Or it must have been his family that did something wrong, that he has this, you know,
Sure. Think about the Book of Job. What's the Book of Job all about?
A Job.
suffering.
Yeah, it's trying to, in some ways make a you know a rational inquiry about suffering, because in the ancient Near East, blessing was tied to favor with God, and curse was God's wrath upon you for not doing whatever you're supposed to do. So here's this person called Job, who was what? What's it say? That he was righteous, right? He was righteous in every way. Um, but he undergoes a lot of suffering. And so he has three friends that are trying to help him out, and trying to counsel him. And what's their overall counsel?
They want him to
Curse
curse God.
God.
What's that?
They want him to curse God.
Okay, he wants them to curse God, but what's before we get there? Well, Job, you really
Yes,
must have done something wrong.
something wrong.
Mhm.
Okay. And well, if you didn't do anything wrong, then it's something that you just didn't realize that you've done wrong, but you did something wrong to make God angry. Okay. And so, a lot of times, we tend to think of that connection between, blessing and obedience is that way. Um, but Is there maybe something else along the way that helps us here too?
Well, didn't he tell them that they were going to be blessed to be a blessing?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's part of the covenant, sure.
The covenant, yeah.
So we're talking a little bit about the garden. So we all know that story pretty well. So let's go back there. And so what happened in the garden there,
Well, they were taken care of and they had a relationship with God.
right?
God loved them. They listened and they obeyed up till, they were tempted, but
Sin came into the world and
yeah, that's
Oh,
separated them.
okay, great. Sin came into the world. What does that mean?
well, they disobeyed.
Is it disobeying? Sin is just disobeying.
Well, they disobeyed, they didn't trust.
We didn't trust.
They were going by their own devices, I guess you might say,
What
listening.
what do you mean by they were going by their own devices?
Well, they listened to the serpent
Okay, and
and made a decision
okay,
that that the serpent was telling them the truth and that God wasn't telling them the truth.
okay,
That they could be just as powerful as God.
right. And so, in some ways, you know, do we as human beings have some limited, what's the word? A limited perspective on things?
Of
We don't
course.
have the big picture.
Okay, great. We don't have the big picture, of course. All right, so we as human beings have a limited perspective. Okay, we certainly are not God, correct?
Mhm.
Okay, and so with that, you know, God is God, we are not. And so in that garden, God says, do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because on the day you eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you're surely going to die.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Okay. So God has laid out a command
Thanks.
that requires what? Some obedience.
Right.
Okay. We don't follow God's commands. What happens? Chaos and death come into the world.
Right.
Okay. And so when we think about this idea of obedience, it's somebody who has a more knowledge, more wisdom, a broader perspective on life that's creating boundaries that are designed to protect rather than to limit.
I was thinking of this in terms of, I mean, it's a weird analogy, but like an animal, or just because the cat was walking around here, an animal or a child or something where the parent does that. It's just like, this is, these are the rules, and if you follow them, we're going to be in harmony here. But if you start, the cat, you start scratching on this thing, then you can't be in this room.
Mhm.
And it's because you've kind of broken, like, I trusted you not to scratch that couch, but you did. So you can't be around it anymore. But it's not punishment, it's to protect
Right.
you.
Exactly. I kind of look at it from the standpoint of, you know, a playground and a fence.
Mhm.
Okay, so you have a playground and it's surrounded by, streets and all that kind of stuff. Okay. If you don't have a fence there and kids are playing, there's always the risk of going out in the street and getting hurt, right?
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so in order for that, you need to shrink where you play. But if I put a fence around there, creates a hedge of protection, you can go out to the fence and you don't have to worry. You get to enjoy that whole playground, without risking getting hit by a car.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that's the way I think not some ways, that's the way we need to see God as far as, this idea of obedience, that God puts up fences so we can enjoy the whole creation without chaos and death. And so, I think, that's the important link, at least for me, between obedience and blessings. Any other thoughts about that?
I was just going to say, it's maybe childish. I don't know. But God is their father. So could a blessing be, I don't know if this is the right term, like a reward for the obedience that they are showing? I mean, if they're obeying and doing what they're supposed to, he gives them blessings and it's like a reward. And when they don't obey, like any other father, you get in trouble.
Well, I
No?
think that trouble comes from your own making and your own doing.
Well, it comes from not obeying.
Yeah, I understand that, but it's not like, okay, we have this, okay, this reward, okay? And if you follow what I say, here you get this reward. If you don't follow what I say, you're going to get smacked in the head. Okay? It's more okay, the idea, okay, if you're not going to obey, okay, there are consequences there that you're going to have to kind of endure.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because when we get this idea of blessing versus curse, because that's what we're talking about here, the curse is, God allowing things to happen just the way you want them to happen. And we know as human beings that we make what? Poor decisions. Think here. I'm in the middle of I'm listening to a podcast. It's all about high places. So the theme is high places in the Old Testament. So those kind of thin places that the mountains always represent those areas where God and man kind of come together. And on the most recent podcast that came out today, they're talking about Solomon. Okay. And so what do we know about Solomon?
He was a king.
All right, he was David's son. He was a king.
He was supposed to be
Wisdom.
wise, wasn't he?
Okay, he had lots of wives.
Why he was wise.
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 Well, it's
Okay,
wisdom.
so he was a person who had obeyed God, and God said that he would give him, what he would like. He would bless him. And what did he ask for?
Yes, for wisdom.
He asked for wisdom. Okay, asked for wisdom. And so we have this dude with what? Lots of wisdom. All right. So what does a man with wisdom do?
Hopefully makes wise decisions.
Well, so tell me, you know the story of Solomon.
What was is the story of the woman that the two women that claimed the same child?
Yeah, that was right after that, kind of describing this type of wisdom that he had. So we have this dude who is, you know, knows God, understands God, loves God, and God says that he'll give him wisdom. All right. And so in his wisdom, what does he do? Well, first thing he does is takes a wife um, from Pharaoh's daughter. So he marries her. So when he marries her, what happens?
She brings idols and things into
Ah,
the
she brings idols and
house.
things. And then it says not only does he do that, that he goes on and what's he do? He marries 700 wives.
Yeah.
700.
And
700.
then all the concubines.
And then he has another 300 concubines. So
Oh.
the 300 concubines are for sex. The other ones are for, you know, uh, mainly, administrative and political alliances. And so that same thing that happens with the first wife happens with the other wives. And so it's pretty soon what is he? He is a what? Wise person?
Yeah.
Yeah. So even the wisest among us,
Mm.
you know, um, and even some of our, choices will lead us to make very poor decisions.
We talked about this years ago at another Bible study. I don't remember, all of us. And I said at the time, first off, you cannot be a husband to 1,000 women. I don't care. I'm sure that we have enough trouble being a husband or a wife to one person. He probably never met 95% of them. He didn't even know who they were. Wouldn't have known him if he fell across them on the street.
Except for the concubines.
Even that 300 is still, honey, that's just
That's
one,
one a day. And you
that's
still
one day a year. You're not
Yeah.
going to get a lot of kids that way. Let's face it.
Oh,
Well,
gosh.
and you're true. That's true. You're doing some of it for, procreation, but some of it you're doing just for pure, lust.
Alliance.
With the concubines for lustful things. Now, if you tucked in the middle of there, besides the 700 wives and the 300 concubines, there's also this little section that talks about the number of horses and soldiers that he had. And so,
Mm.
what does it say? Or what did God tell Moses? When he was talking about kings and leaders, that they shouldn't have an army and they shouldn't have abundance, because abundance leads to what?
Laziness.
Laziness, also
trouble.
self-reliance,
Trouble.
trouble.
Piety.
Huh?
Piety, they get a big head.
Yeah, yeah. So
Jealousy.
yeah, yeah. So sometimes things that will look good and they're really not so good. Even the man was supposed to have the wisdom, you know, makes poor decisions that lead to death and destruction. All right, so what are some ways that we experience God's blessings when we obey him today?
Mm. Well, positive things happen.
Okay, like?
I don't know, health and success.
Okay.
More people come to know God when we make God known, and that's a good thing.
Okay.
I mean,
I think we get blessed. We get peace
Does.
when things aren't quite the way we want them to be. Knowing that God's in our corner and he's, but it's a peace that passes all understanding, kind of a thing. And I think that's a blessing from God.
Okay. I would venture a guess, and maybe I'm unique. I don't think so though. Is that sometimes, it's like, what are some ways we experience God's blessings? Sometimes God blesses without us
Knowing it.
knowing it. And I don't mean so. I mean, there's been a number of times in my life where um I've done something. I don't know. Um and thought nothing of it. Thought nothing of it. Okay. It's just that, I'm called to be a Christian person, and out of, Christian love, I do this, that, or the other thing. And it's, to me, a big nothing. But maybe later on, people come back and say, "Hey, do you remember when you did that? This really impacted my life." And it's like,
Hmm.
no, I really don't remember that much at all. Um, and so I would encourage us that sometimes, we're going to see and experience some of those blessings, but sometimes, and I would venture a guess that quite often, um, blessings happen and we don't experience them. We don't see them right away, but God sees them.
Hmm.
Well, you were being a blessed, you were being blessed to be a blessing.
Right, right.
Even though you don't remember the situation all the time,
Mhm.
you're being blessed.
And I would say that happens to all of us.
Yeah.
And it's happened the reverse for me. I kind of, some of you, probably most of you have heard the story now that, how did I get to the place that I am now, as far as, a believer in Jesus Christ? Um, I believe that it was the direct consequence of a group of women
Mhm.
who were praying for my salvation and praying for, me getting into the church. Um, you know, some of those women I know, and some of the women I don't know. But, it was through their, faithful prayers that, not I was not only saved, but that, I became, an active participant in the church. And, I'm sure that what they were praying was a lot less than what God did in my life today.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And what does that come from? That comes from someone or someones who that took God's call seriously and obeyed him, and it
Hmm.
impacted somebody's life.
Mhm.
So, how does God's faithfulness encourage us even when we fail?
Well, we know he's never going to give up on us, really.
There you go.
Yeah.
So if we take that piece of scripture seriously, we know that what God says is that He's going to be faithful.
It reminds me of that Footprints poem.
Mhm.
Excuse me. Mm-hmm. Yep. Other thoughts?
Mhm.
So how let's talk about this a little bit. How does obedience lead to spiritual blessings like peace, joy, and a deeper relationship with God, even in challenging times?
Well, like we just said, if you if you're living within the bounds and you make you're used to that and you have a habit of doing that, then when times become difficult, you have that structure there that is like a safety that you live in God's protection and you know that your relationship with God is strong, so you're not alone facing the challenging whatever it is.
Okay.
I know from my own experiences of a sick child and stuff. I mean, it just seemed like God was always sending people or things into my life at the time to bless me, even when I was in a real challenging time. And I think it's amazing to know that, God's still in control. And if you're open to it, and even in your darkest days, you can see, somebody's there to bless you. And it's only people that have been sent by God. They just didn't happen.
Okay.
In challenging times, just to know that you can go to him,
Mm-hmm.
that's comforting in itself. That you can
Yeah.
talk to him, that, you may not understand the whys of things, but somehow, even though we may not understand, there's a reason.
Yeah. I think of the Bible verse where, like you pray, but you're not even praying words. It's just moans and groans or something.
Mm-hmm.
But God knows what you need and is there for you.
Mhm.
Okay. Good. Good. Well, hard to believe it's 8:15. And guess what?
Your bedtime.
No, I still got 45 minutes before my bedtime. We did not finish this section. Uh, we still got another like 2 sections to go, so we will pick it up again next week.
Yeah.
This is
We're not
juicy.
in a rush here.
No, this is juicy stuff. You know what? Like I said, I think that Deuteronomy really has a lot to say. So,
Yeah.
Is there
um,
going to be Sunday school on Sunday after the
is there
pageant?
is there going to be Sunday school on
It's the
Sunday?
hanging of the greens Sunday.